Hello. Yes, so just to reiterate, my name is Jasmine and I am going to be discussing courses and funding. So first, just to give you a little bit about me, so I am the senior advisor here at SRI and I'm a public health candidate here at McGill, but I also did my undergrad here at McGill in the Interdepartmental Honors Immunology. And I'm also an out-of-province student. So if you guys have any questions about any of these things, you can feel free to ask me, whether research related or not. In terms of my research experience, I've had 3 major research positions, so 2 of which were dry lab, one at McGill and one not at McGill, and one of which was a wet lab. So the wet lab was my most recent research experience. It was my honors project. I also got an internal award and the NSERC with that, but I've also done a 396 project. So I know a little bit about those areas in particular. But also my degrees have been inherently interdepartmental, so I will try to diversify my talk as much as possible. Also, I noticed in the chat there was one question about remote opportunities. I think that's a great question considering the time we're in now. In terms of my most recent position, I actually ended up doing this summer remotely when we went online with COVID. There are ways to do things remotely, and if you wanted to, most of it would be data analysis. So depending on what field you're in general, if you wanted to stay remote and get a lab position, you likely would have to volunteer. You may be able to do a 396, and I'll talk more about this later. But most of what you'd be doing is data analysis because you won't be able to go into a lab and do data collection. Okay, so in terms of the talk, the bulk of this presentation will be undergrad opportunities because in my experience at the graduate level, graduates do get a bit more help in terms of finding those opportunities with funding, etc. But I'll briefly talk about graduate opportunities, not only for the graduates if you are here, but also because undergrads, you might want to think about these well in advance, especially if you're going into your 4th year or already in your 4th year. And also a lot of this information that Victor talked about, that I'll talk about, and that it will be talked about in general tonight can be found in the How to Get a Research Position Handbook, which is on our website. And before I start, I just want to say that for any position, whether it's graduate or undergraduate, you will have to find the professor yourself, like Victor was mentioning with the emailing, etc. You know, in a few cases, you're able to narrow your search based on the opportunity maybe you want. You're able to see a list of professors that are eligible for that. But, you know, the interview process is always there, and you also have to, you know, do emailing, etc. So hopefully we at SRI can help you through that process a bit and make it easier for you, such as with our SRI database, which you have access to if you're a full member, and other events like these. So for undergraduate opportunities and classes, first are non-honors classes. So non-honors classes in general, you can start when you're in your 2nd year or above. And also generally there's less preference for previous research experience for people who are not doing honors and not looking into sort of financial compensation. So one type of non-honors class is called the 396. So if you're an if you're a science student or an arts and science student, you're eligible to do this. 396s are 1 semester, and they can be done in any semester, fall, winter, or spring. And 396s are, depending on the department, still going on depending on the prof. So it really is difficult right now with COVID. Everything is really department specific with COVID, especially with everything online. It depends on if the lab can do things remotely. So if you are interested in doing that, I would say reach out in advance if you can and ask if they have anything remote. If you're in Montreal, if you're willing to go into lab, they may allow you to come in, but that's up to you. Generally, you'll have a summary paper at the end of a 396, and 396s are 3 credits, which means 9 hours, but oftentimes it is more than that, especially if you're doing a wet lab position. The pros are that they're short commitment, it's only 1 semester, and you know, it sort of is an EZA depending on the prof. Profs are generally very nice, but you really have to do your research, talk to students who've taken, you know, classes with that prof before, but particularly not classes, sorry, taken 396 classes with that prof before and been in their lab to see, you know, how that prof is. And also 396 projects make the prof give you a project where you have to get data. you know, if you try and do an RA position or you go and volunteer, sometimes, especially as an undergrad, they might give you like washing glassware, and that's not too common, but it can happen. And so by doing a 396 project, you force them to be able to actually, you know, get into science. In mind. So there's an equivalent thing in the arts department called Cent 499. So again, it's basically like a 396, but for arts, but the difference is that you do a summer internship and then you write a paper in the fall. And so while you're writing your paper, that counts for 3 credits. And so the final non-honors project that you can do is something called a 496. This might not be the exact course code for your degree or department, but generally they're called 496s. Essentially, the theory of a 496 is that it's 2 semesters. So it's like an honors project. You get a full year project and you get the same investment, but the difference is you don't have to get the required courses that come with an honors degree. And the benefit of doing a 496 instead of a 396 is that since it's a longer project, you're giving more contribution into the project itself. So there's higher likelihood that you might get published. And also, you know, you're actually getting more out of the project as well, because the first, you know, few months, maybe like 2-3 months, you're just getting used to the project. And if you're doing a 396, sometimes it can end. You can still volunteer, but if that's what you want to do, you know, just keep all of this in mind when you're making your decision as to, you know, what courses or whatever else that you want to do. So now we're getting to honors projects. So honors projects are for any discipline. Science, arts, there are different types of honors projects wherever you are, but what that honors project looks like really depends on your discipline. But in general, an honors project is a full year project, fall or winter. Typically you can't start in the summer. You can start outside of the honors, but sometimes I know in chemistry you're allowed to do the honors in the summer, but it's very, very specific to your degree as to, you know, whether you're allowed to start the honors course itself. Typically it's only during the year. At the end, you actually write a thesis paper, bit different than a summary paper because it usually is more involved. And oftentimes there's a presentation. The thing about an honors project, which is different than the other courses, is that it's a lot more commitment. It's between 3 and 6 credits a semester, which oftentimes means you're reaching almost 30 hours a week. And so, you know, that takes away the opportunity to take more courses, but it also allows you to dedicate that time to research, which you may have been dedicating time to anyway if you had less courses. So you just have less coursework on your plate at the same time. So there's pros and cons with that. And often, even if you are starting in the fall, some profs do expect you to start the summer beforehand, maybe a month before, but that really is up to you. Even if that is sort of the general, like what happens in your program, if you don't want to do that, be transparent and tell them that, and you won't be forced. So the pros and cons, again, same thing like the last one, more commitment, more contribution, and also with the prerequisites that you get, it actually helps your project because you're getting more specialized information that you can then put in place in your project in future and put into practice. And it's also a great opportunity for awards because, you know, you're so invested in that project that your applications for these awards are often stronger just by nature. And if you are interested in a master's or research afterwards, this is really the way to go because you really get a better insight into what research is, not only with the honors project itself, but also the program, because you have to do presentations, you have to do an abstract, you have to do a thesis paper. You know, it'll give you a little glimpse into what a master's will be like to a lesser degree. So if you are thinking of research in the future, I would keep this in your sights. But the cons, again, it is a lot of work. And there is less choice in a project, whereas like a 396, it can be outside of your major. An honors project has to be within your major. So now for summer internships. For undergrads, this is really the main source if you want to get money. If you want to get monetary compensation, generally it's going to be from an award or a summer internship. So you can be an undergraduate research assistant. It's less common, but it happens. But, you know, RAs, you know, sometimes they'll have BScs, MScs. So getting an award is a great way to get non-taxable pay. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is called the NSERC. So essentially what the NSERC is, it's a 16-week full-time you're sort of roping yourself into a job for the summer, but it's under the umbrella of an award given out by the National Science and Engineering Council. And so this award is about $7,000 here at McGill. It may differ if you're hoping to go to another place. I will say if you are a McGill student, it's easiest to, basically if you're not a McGill student, it's hard for you to come to McGill and apply for the NSERC. If you are a McGill student and you want to go elsewhere, it'll be hard for you to apply elsewhere for the NSERC, because wherever you want to apply with the NSERC, you have to apply to that institution. So just keep that in mind. It's easiest if you're trying to get the NSERC as a McGill student to stay at McGill, etc. The thing about the NSERC is you must be a Canadian citizen to apply to this, and you have to be in a bachelor's degree. And there's a max of 3 that you're allowed to have in your undergrad. So in terms of the applications, there's specific departments your professor has to be within. And so these are listed, but go check out McGill's website to make sure that you know, your professor is eligible. Also something to note is that the deadlines for NSERC are internal to the department. So again, just check the website. That is where you'll get the best information for you. So the other thing about NSERC is that in order for you to be able to apply to NSERC, the professor has to hold an NSERC grant. And so if you're with a professor that doesn't hold an NSERC grant, you are eligible for something else, which I'll talk about, called the SURA. You know, NSERC itself, they have to have the grant. So you can always ask the professor if, you know, if you wanted to apply, you can ask something like, you know, I'm interested in the NSERC grant. Would you be willing to back me? And then if they say no, then no, they'll probably give you the reason why. So something to keep in mind with these applications as well is in previous years, GPA was a big part of the application process that they took into account. So if you are interested in research, I mean, you know, it depends on what you're applying to, but for things like this, like the awards, GPA is taken into account. So just keep that in mind, especially in your if you're in your first few years. But it doesn't mean that if you don't have like a 4.0 GPA, you're not going to get it. You know, just apply. You're never going to get it if you don't apply, right? But you can also ask the professor, you know, how realistic your chances are, and there's other options for you out there. Yes. So this is the SURA. So the SURA, if you are an international student, or if your professor does not hold an NSERC grant, but is a McGill professor, then you can be eligible for the SURA if you are in science or arts and science. This is 7,000 total as well. And the SURA actually changed changed a bit this year. And I'll go into a little bit more about that later. But something to note is that it is a little bit more competitive typically in previous years than the NSERC, just because there is less restriction on who can apply. And new this year is that they said on their website, GPA is not as highly weighted, and they want you to apply if you wouldn't be able to get a research position otherwise. So, you know, in previous years it was GPA based. This year it sounds like that's new. So in terms of the competition, we really can't say now. We'll see how this plays out. But also new this year, I can go, yes, so there's no restriction on your department. This is what this is saying. There's no restriction on the department, and also certain departments are grouped together. But new this year is something called the Social Equity SURA. So typically there's a set number of SURAs given per department or per group, but they also have something called the Social Equity SURA, which will be given in addition to the other SURAs, which are for projects that are dedicated to social equity. So if your project falls in this category, you may be eligible for it. Also, if you there's also something called the SURE program in engineering, which Rahul will talk about later. So the ARIA is the arts equivalent of the SURA. So I'm not going to go too much into it because it basically is, they really parallel each other. The difference is this is a $4,500 award, and also there's no set amount given out. It really depends on the funding that year. It's always expanding. And so you can see here the eligibility based on your degree, and students can't receive the ARIA if they receive the NSERC or the SURA. So that really applies more if you're in arts and science. Just know that you can only receive one. There's also something called the Arts Internship Office, the AIO. So it's really a centralized hub for internships in arts, but they also have research opportunities in this hub. So if, let's say you find a research opportunity yourself that isn't, eligible for the ARIA, for example, or it's at McGill specifically, that if it's at McGill, it'll be eligible for the ARIA. Otherwise, if it's not at McGill and you're a McGill student and it is research, you can apply to the Arts Internship Office for funding, and they'll ask for documents showing that this is legit, and then you'll go through the whole process. And last year they gave out about $400,000 to 119 students. There is an event this Wednesday if you're interested in this, in learning more about the Arts Internship Office. So the event link is down here. You'll get the slides afterwards, so you'll get access to that link, but definitely go if you are in arts and interested in learning more. And not finally, but another opportunity is under the McGill International Experience Award. So there's a few of these, and Gio will be talking about one or some of them. So these are all different disciplines and all over the world. And these are part of the Internship Office's network. So that's another place to go check if you're interested in research or internships in general. So it really doesn't matter what your degree is. If this might be a great opportunity for you. And they were actually able to, even though these are global placements, some were able to go online this year, some got canceled, but we'll see what happens this summer. They'll be giving more information about that. And so the last thing I want to say is internal funding is a great source as well. It's generally less competitive than some of the NSERC, SURA, ARIA stuff. And so whenever you are applying to a professor, definitely ask them if their research group or cohort or whatever sort of, research center that they're a part of, ask them if they have an internal award, because that is also a great opportunity to get funding. So Ife, if you wanted to jump in.
All right, so hi everyone, I'm Ife. I'm the VP Events of SRI, and I'm currently in my U2 year in biochemistry at McGill. And basically this summer I did a research internship at the IRCM, which stands for Institut de Recherche Clinique de Montréal. And it's just a research institute that's pretty close to McGill, and it's affiliated with UDM and associated with McGill. So a lot of the PIs at the IRCM are actually profs at McGill in different departments. And every year they hold like a summer internship program for undergrads. You can kind of just apply to those by emailing profs at the IRCM and stuff like that. I actually found my placement with my prof with the SRI volunteer database, which was cool. Yeah, so the internship is like 12 to 16 weeks in the summer. And as Jasmine mentioned, there is internal funding at the IRCM. They have a $2,000 award called the IRCM Scholarship for Young Researchers. And the deadline for this is in like mid-February. You have to write a couple essays. Your PI has to like submit a project proposal for you, that kind of stuff. So if you do win the award, that's $2,000, and the rest of your pay is supplemented by your prof. They usually pay around like $1,500 every 4 weeks. So if you're doing a 16-week internship, that'd be like $6,000. And as part of the internship program, they also have like a seminar series where they invite grad students and professors and other people to come speak about like what grad school is like and why you should get into research, and talk about their own research projects, stuff like that, which is really cool. And at the end of the summer, all of the summer interns get together and have like poster presentations of what they did in the summer. So this summer is actually a little bit different because everything was online. I was still able to do my project in person, which was cool. The hours were a little less, so I was in for like 35 hours a week kind of thing. But yeah, definitely if you're looking to do like a summer internship or something, IRCM is a great option. I know the name sounds really French, but like you can do yours in English, no problem at all. So if anyone has any questions about that later, feel free to stick around during the Q&A and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. And I've also linked at the bottom like the website where you can find more information about the internships. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, Ife. Okay, so I'm going to talk for about like 2 seconds about graduate, just because if you are in 3rd or 4th year, or even if you're in your 1st year of your graduate program, keep these funding opportunities in mind. So graduate funding, the applications are usually the 1st semester. So if you want to do the FRQS or the FRQNT, those applications are actually coming up this October 15th, I believe. CIHR is December 1st and NSERC is around the same time. But if you're an undergrad, let's say you are in your 4th year and you already know the prof that you want to be doing your master's with, you are actually eligible to apply for this funding because you will be in your master's next year. You are also eligible if you're in your 1st year of your master's, because you'll also be continuing the thesis next year. But you know, if you did want to kind of get that funding right away, the thing is you do have to know who your prof is, because you have to know your project in order to do any of these applications. So with that being said, if you want to get these right away, then look for profs well in advance and then do that search sort of summer-ish so that you can confirm a prof by the fall to do your master's in for the next year. And then you can do these applications. Otherwise, the applications are more meant for students in their 1st year of the grad going into 2nd year. Okay, thank you very much. And feel free to ask questions in the Q&A session or email us at the SRI email.